My name is Lila Harper. I'm 31, and I just stepped out of the grocery store with a cart full of essentials I barely needed when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I ignored it at first, telling myself I'd call back later. But it buzzed again, a sharp, insistent vibration that made my stomach tighten. It was my mom. I paused near the exit, the cold winter air brushing my cheeks. The voicemail icon blinked. I pressed play, half dreading it. "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice rang, that familiar warmth hiding the sharp edge of what she was about to say. "We're having dinner at the house tonight, but, don't come by. It's nothing personal, really. It's just that Emma feels uncomfortable around you. You know, right? Anyway, we'll talk later. Love you." Beep. I stood frozen, gripping the grocery bag, so tightly my knuckles whitened. Emma, my younger brother Jason's girlfriend of 4 months. The woman who, last Christmas, whispered to my mother that my career in teaching was just a placeholder, a temporary thing until something better came along. The same woman who wore designer scarves to backyard family parties and once described our living room as adorably outdated. And now, I wasn't invited to dinner in the house I helped keep afloat. 3 weeks ago, Jason's unemployment had sent Mom into a panic. Their bills were piling up, overdue notices stacking higher than the mail I ignored each day. My father had tried to downplay it, stubbornly claiming he could fix it without asking for help. I didn't have much, but I liquidated a small savings account, enough to cover the overdue rent and utilities for the house that had been my home since I was 7. I remembered Mom's shaky voice on the phone when I asked how much she needed. "It's the lot," she said. "I don't want to ask, but I just don't know what we'll do." I gave her the number anyway, told her it would be transferred by evening. And here I was, standing outside that same house, uninvited. I replayed the voicemail again, slower this time. "Emma feels uncomfortable around you." The words hit me like an icy slap. The house wasn't hers. It wasn't even Jason's. It was mine. There's all of us. But somehow, by some twisted logic, my presence was now inconvenient. I walked to my car, ignoring the stares of passers-by, trying to calm the heat rising in my chest. I had always been the responsible one, the one who paid bills, handled emergencies, kept the household functioning when my parents' pride or Jason's carelessness failed. And now, in their eyes, that made me invisible. I opened my notes app, the one I'd meticulously used to track every payment I made for the household, utilities, groceries, internet, car repairs, even random emergencies like the week the heater broke in the middle of January. Each number was a reminder, a silent ledger of sacrifices that no one seemed to acknowledge. 157 entries. I scrolled to the bottom, stared at the list, and felt something inside me shift. This wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about the dinners, or the texts, or the empty chair at the table. It was about respect, about being seen as more than just a solution, a temporary patch, a stopgap. I leaned back against my car and thought about all the times I'd said yes before the question was even finished. The time I covered Jason's overdraft for the 5th time. The time I paid for a new roof shingle after Dad refused to fix it. The time I rearranged my schedule to attend a mandatory parent-teacher meeting he forgot to go to, and Mom patted my hand and said, "You always know what to do. Always. Always invisible." The sky above me darkened as evening approached. I realized I'd spent more time thinking about them, their comfort, their crises, than about my own needs. And Emma, quiet, poised, smiling politely while I carried everyone else's burdens, was now the reason I was excluded. I sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. For the first time in years, I felt the strange calm that comes with the clarity of decision. I opened my banking app, tapped through the accounts linked to the house, double-checked the automatic payments I'd been running for years. Each tap, each confirmation, felt like reclaiming pieces of myself. Then I opened my messaging app. I pressed play on Mom's voicemail again, just to hear it one last time. And I typed 2 words in reply. Copy that. It wasn't anger, exactly. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition. Recognition that I had spent decades being everyone else's safety net, their emergency plan, their invisible force holding everything together. And now, I owed it to myself to be seen first. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the snow starting to fall outside the windshield. For the first time in years, the world seemed like it could wait. And for the first time, so could I. I didn't drive home that evening. Instead, I kept the engine running, letting the glow of the dashboard lights illuminate my face as I replayed the voicemail in my head. I thought about the last time I felt truly rested. I couldn't remember. My life had become a series of errands, emergency calls, and whispered crises, all stitched together by the unspoken expectation that I would always say yes. 3 weeks ago, when Mom had called me in tears about the overdue rent and looming utility bills, I had immediately reached for my savings. My own apartment fund, my tiny emergency cushion, it all went to patching the leaks of their household. Dad had barely said anything, just a gruff nod and a mutter thanks. And Jason? He'd sent me a thumbs-up emoji from his phone, already halfway back to scrolling social media, unaware that I'd drained my bank account to keep the lights on. I remembered standing in the living room after the transfers went through, watching Mom cry quietly in the corner, her hands shaking over the stack of bills. Dad just sat in his recliner, silent, his pride shielding any words of gratitude. And now, I wasn't even allowed at the dinner table in the house I'd saved. The injustice hit harder than the cold wind outside. I opened my notes app, scrolling through the meticulous log I kept, 134 entries of payments I'd made for everything from groceries to medical copays. Every week, every month, every unexpected expense, recorded, tracked, accounted for. And none of it had mattered. I sat back in the seat and ran my hands through my hair. The anger wasn't immediate. First came the hollow feeling, the same one you get when you realize you've been invisible in plain sight. Then it grew into sharp edges, each memory cutting a little deeper. The time I had rearranged my work schedule to drive Jason to an interview he had forgotten. The time I lent him money for a security deposit he swore he'd pay back next week. The nights I stayed late at the office to cover the family bills. Each one became a hammer pounding on my chest. I realized I had a choice. I could continue being the invisible infrastructure that everyone relied on until they decided I was inconvenient, or I could finally step away. My fingers hovered over the banking app again. Automatic payments for the household, shared credit cards, linked accounts. I reviewed everything. I didn't hesitate. I began canceling the payments I'd been maintaining for years. Each tap of the screen felt like lifting a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Then, I opened my messaging app, scrolling through the thread with Mom. I reread her voicemail transcription in my head, the words replaying until they felt heavier than the phone in my hand. And I typed 2 words back. Copy that. It was not dramatic. It wasn't spite. It was acknowledgement that I had given everything I had and received nothing in return. For once, the universe could wait while I rebuilt myself. I thought about Emma again, polished, poised, and perfectly content to sit in the house I had saved, sipping wine at the table I'd paid to keep warm. I tried to imagine what it must have felt like for her, comfortable, entitled, fully unaware of the storm she had indirectly caused. And for a moment, the anger shifted into clarity. My presence had been inconvenient only because I refused to disappear quietly. I leaned my head back against the seat and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The city lights blurred across the windshield as my thoughts wandered to Jason. My brother had always been the golden one, the dreamer who rarely faced consequences for his mistakes. I had been the practical one, the dependable one, the one who made sacrifices quietly while everyone else celebrated life. And now, it seemed, those sacrifices had been invisible at best, and irrelevant at worst. I thought about all the times I had put their needs above my own, rearranging schedules, lending money, covering emergencies. It was as if my very existence had been a ledger of favors to be checked off silently, only to be dismissed when it became inconvenient. The decision crystallized in me that night. I would no longer be the invisible one. I would reclaim my time, my energy, and my peace. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, how I would enforce it, how I would confront them, but the spark of resolve was there, quiet but undeniable. I finally started the car and drove aimlessly, letting the hum of the engine drown out the gnawing resentment. My phone sat face down on the passenger seat. No calls, no texts, no demands would break my focus tonight. I thought about going back to the grocery store, putting the bags in the trunk, and walking away from the world that seemed to take me for granted. Somewhere along the highway, I realized that I wasn't running from anyone. I was running toward myself. And for the first time in years, that thought felt like freedom. I parked near a small coffee shop, the lights warm against the winter chill, and just sat. No one needed me for anything. No one called for favors, emergencies, or financial patches. I let the silence stretch, letting it wash over me, soothing the tension coiled in my chest. The voicemail replayed in my head one last time before I forced it away. I was done listening, done apologizing, done being the invisible infrastructure that kept everyone else afloat. I had a choice now, and I intended to take it. The first step was simple, reclaiming control. The next would be more complicated, but for the first time in my adult life, I felt ready. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, my body still tense from the unresolved anger simmering beneath the surface. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. I knew it would be buzzing, flaring with demands, guilt trips, or frantic messages from my family, desperate to reel me back into the life I was slowly untangling myself from. Instead, I brewed a cup of coffee, letting the aroma fill my tiny kitchen, grounding me in a reality that was finally entirely my own. But even as I sipped, my mind returned to the house. Their house, the one I had saved. I could see it clearly in my mind's eye. Mom bustling around, Dad perched in his recliner, Jason leaning against the counter, and Emma, smiling politely, oblivious to the storm she had orchestrated by simply existing. That invisible chair at the table, my seat, haunted me. I thought about all the nights I'd been the one to stay up, juggling bills, spreadsheets, and reminders for everyone else, my own dreams neatly stacked in the corner, gathering dust. I realized that this wasn't just about dinner. It was about recognition, about being seen as more than the lifeline they always assumed I would be. By mid-morning, I had made my decision. If they couldn't acknowledge my contributions, if they couldn't even offer me a chair at the table in my own house, then I had no reason to participate in their carefully curated illusion of a family dinner. I drafted a plan, small steps first. Block access to shared accounts, revoke automatic payments, and delete any lingering financial responsibility I had shouldered for them. Each tap on my phone was a pulse of quiet rebellion, a reclaiming of power I had long forfeited. And then came the harder step, my confrontation. I wasn't sure exactly how I'd do it, or even if I'd be heard, but I knew that silence was no longer an option. Their ignorance, their comfort, their assumption that I would quietly absorb everything and continue as their invisible scaffolding, it had to end. I drove to the house that afternoon. My heart thumped in my chest, not from fear but from the strange thrill of knowing I was finally taking action. The snow had started to fall lightly, dusting the windows with delicate flakes, and the warm glow from inside beckoned me like a siren's call. I parked across the street, just long enough to gather my resolve. Jason opened the door when I knocked. He looked surprised, barefoot in socks, a casual grin on his face. "Hey, you could have texted first," he said. I stepped past him without a word, feeling a thrill of control I hadn't experienced in years. Inside, Mom was pouring wine. Dad perched on the couch like a sentinel, arms crossed, posture rigid. Emma wasn't there, convenient. I stood in the center of the living room and spoke, calm but loud enough for all to hear. "If I'm the family ATM, the least you could do is offer me a seat at the table." Dad's laugh was short, dismissive. "Don't start with the victim talk. You offered. That was your choice." "Yes," I said, even and deliberate. "And now I've changed my mind." Jason paced behind me, trying to form words that didn't exist. "We didn't mean to hurt you. You excluded me from my own house," I replied, my voice steady. Mom stepped forward, hands trembling, trying to mediate. "It was just a misunderstanding." I pulled an envelope from my jacket and dropped it on the coffee table. Dad's eyes widened as he read the contents. Loan cancellation notice, utility cosign withdrawal, a legal letter ending my financial responsibilities. Jason blinked. "Wait, what is this?" "Freedom," I said simply. Dad stood abruptly. "You're really going to let the family fall apart after everything we've done for you?" I laughed, sharp and short. "Everything you've done for me? You mean everything you've taken from me?" I turned toward the door. "This is the last conversation about money, and the last time you see me beg for basic respect." Jason's voice, quieter now, almost pleading. We're blood." I looked at him under the soft glow of the porch light. "Really?" I said. "Blood doesn't bleed you dry and call it love." I walked out, the snow crunching beneath my boots, and slid into my car. The engine roared to life, and for the first time in years, I drove away without looking back. The house, the family, the invisible expectations, all left behind. By the time I reached my own apartment, quiet and empty, it felt strange. Almost too quiet, but I sank onto my couch, letting the silence wrap around me. No calls, no emergency requests, no invisible burdens. Just me. The day after I left, the house didn't change. The lights were still on, the mail still piled in the hallway, and the quiet, once comforting, now felt like a statement. I was gone, and they couldn't fix it with a text or a casual apology. I didn't answer any calls that day, not from Mom, not from Dad, not from Jason. I needed space to feel what I hadn't allowed myself in years: relief, clarity, and for the first time, boundaries. By evening, the first wave of panic had reached them. Dad called 4 times in an hour, each ring echoing like a reminder of the confrontation. Mom left voice messages swinging wildly between sobbing pleas and forced sweetness. "Lila, please. I don't understand. You're hurting us." I understood perfectly. Every payment I had made, every emergency I had covered, every ounce of myself I had poured into keeping their lives afloat, they had taken it for granted. I didn't respond. Instead, I logged into the accounts I had previously managed: Costco, shared credit cards, and the joint utility accounts. Every one of them I closed, revoked, or deleted. It felt strange at first, almost sacrilegious, like erasing part of my history, but it was also cleansing. Each closure was a brick lifted from the weight I had carried for decades. 2 days later, the first real consequence appeared. The mortgage payment bounced. Notices followed, formal and unyielding. The panic on their side turned into frantic calls and emails. Mom's messages begged, pleaded, even tried reasoning. "I don't know what we'll do, Lila," she wrote. "This isn't just about money, it's about family." I stared at the screen, reading the words slowly, letting them land. Family didn't uninvite the person who saved their home. Family didn't ignore the hands that held everything together until it threatened to collapse. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table, sorting through the receipts, bank statements, and notes I had kept over the years. I printed everything. Every payment, every transfer, every little emergency covered on my dime. The printer jammed twice. I fixed it without complaint. Of course I did. Habit was hard to break. I stacked the pages into a thick pile and slid them into a manila envelope. On the sticky note, I wrote simply, "Since you like records, here's mine." I mailed it the next morning. The reactions were immediate. Missed calls, texts, and emails flooded in. Mom frantic. Dad confused and angry. Jason trying to figure out how to manipulate the situation back to comfort. I didn't respond. Silence, finally, became my shield. That evening, I walked through my small apartment, noticing for the first time how light it felt. The walls weren't adorned with family photos, the counters weren't littered with unpaid bills or reminders of someone else's chaos. It was mine, my space, my sanctuary. I set up a small corner with a desk, a lamp, and a notepad where I could write without interruption. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Days turned into weeks. My phone stopped buzzing constantly. Work became easier, more productive, because I wasn't juggling family emergencies in the background. I started small, groceries without guilt, dinners without distraction, even a walk in the park where I wasn't expected to solve someone else's problem. And then came the subtle changes in my family. Jason showed up at my workplace one afternoon, a shadow of the carefree boy I once knew. He didn't ask for money or favors. He didn't ask me to fix anything. He simply delivered news. The house, the one I had saved, had officially defaulted. Mom and Dad were staying with Aunt Marlene, juggling couches and temporary rooms. I listened quietly. Inside, I felt relief mingled with a strange sorrow. They were facing the consequences of choices they had made or failed to make. But I felt no obligation to step back in. I didn't know them more than I had already given. Emma had left, finally. That piece of clarity hit harder than I expected. Not with vengeance or satisfaction, but with understanding. The dynamics that had made me invisible were gone. She wasn't there to act as a wedge, and the house that had once symbolized my sacrifices had fallen into disarray without me. The realization was profound. The very people who depended on me for their comfort and security could no longer take me for granted. I continued with small, deliberate steps to rebuild my life. I signed the lease on a new apartment, a modest studio with a skylight and exposed brick. Nothing grand, nothing tied to anyone else's expectations. I furnished it slowly, each piece a choice made for me, not them. The first night, I slept with the lights on, expecting emergencies that never came. By the third night, I slept through until morning. Real sleep. And in that quiet, in that calm, I began to realize something I had always ignored. Independence was not loneliness. Self-respect was not selfishness. My life, the one I had built for everyone else, was finally mine to reclaim. Weeks passed, and the chaos on their end slowly transformed into something I could observe from a safe distance. My phone remained mostly silent, and I finally stopped expecting it to ring with emergency calls. Each day without their interruptions reinforced the reality I had chosen. My life, my rules, my peace. Then, one afternoon, Jason appeared again. Not at the house. I hadn't returned, but at my workplace, standing hesitantly outside the office entrance. His expression was unreadable at first, a mixture of guilt and awkwardness, stripped of the confidence that had always made him seem untouchable. I wanted to tell you, he began, voice low. We're moving out of state. Mom and Dad they're staying with family temporarily. Things aren't great. I listened without interrupting. There was no pleading in his tone this time, no expectation that I would fix everything. He was delivering news, not asking for favors. I realized how much lighter I felt, simply because I didn't owe him anything anymore. They lost the house, he continued, almost as a statement of fact. And Emma left. Things settled a little, but it's still rough. I nodded slowly. I know, I said. Not a word more. No anger, no satisfaction, just recognition of reality. He sighed, running a hand over his face. Mom says you're punishing everyone. She says it's cruel. Cruel. That word echoed in my mind. I smiled faintly, the way one does when they finally understand a truth that has been hidden beneath layers of expectation. Cruel, I repeated. I gave up years of my life for people who couldn't even offer me a chair at dinner. There's nothing cruel about stepping back for self-respect. Jason hesitated. I could see it, the recognition that he had taken me for granted, that their dependence on me had blinded them to my humanity. I get it now, he said quietly, though he couldn't fully articulate it yet. The realization hit me in a way that was both comforting and bitter. I hadn't destroyed my family. I hadn't abandoned them. I had simply removed myself from a situation that treated my contributions as invisible, my boundaries as optional. I was no longer the invisible scaffolding holding their world together. I was free. That night, back in my apartment, I reflected on everything I had done. I had walked away, yes, but I had done it thoughtfully, decisively, and without malice. I had sent envelopes of documentation, closed accounts, and established legal boundaries, not to punish, but to reclaim myself. And in the quiet aftermath, I discovered something profound. Peace was far more valuable than compliance, and respect could never come from fear of abandonment. The next weeks became a rhythm of rebuilding. I focused on work, took on better contracts, and allowed myself small luxuries I hadn't permitted in years. A solo dinner out, a weekend trip to a nearby town, even a lazy afternoon spent reading without interruption. Each act was a stitch in the fabric of a life that belonged entirely to me. Messages from Mom eventually slowed to nothing. Jason stopped calling after the first few attempts. Even Dad's rigid silence became less oppressive with time. They were learning, in their own messy, imperfect ways, what it meant to exist without my constant support. And I was learning what it meant to exist for myself. Then one evening, I received an unexpected message. It was from a woman I had never met. Emma's friend, actually. I just wanted to say, it read, reading your story, what you went through, it makes sense. You did the right thing walking away. I stared at it for a long moment. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to respond. I didn't need validation from strangers, or from the family who had overlooked me for decades. I simply saved a screenshot, a reminder that my choice was justifiable, even righteous. That night, as I poured a glass of wine for myself, I finally allowed myself to think about the girl I had once been, the dependable one, the fixer, the quiet hero. She deserved better than she had been given. I smiled faintly, realizing that leaving hadn't been an act of cruelty, It had been an act of courage. For months, life remained quiet. I had built boundaries that were firm but not hostile. I allowed myself to enjoy things for myself alone. Work thrived because I had energy to invest. I slept without waking at 3 a.m., expecting emergencies that would never come. I began to understand that the peace I had sought for so long was finally mine, not borrowed, not conditional, not tied to anyone else's gratitude. And the last piece of clarity settled gently, like dust and sunlight. Love, loyalty, and respect cannot exist where only obligation is given. Sometimes, leaving is not a betrayal. Sometimes, leaving is the only way to save yourself. I had given everything to my family, and they had used it without acknowledgement. Walking away wasn't selfish, it was survival. I poured another glass of wine, sat on my couch, and finally allowed myself to exhale. My life was no longer dictated by others' expectations. My choices were my own, and for the first time in a long time, it felt as though I had truly come home to myself. Months had passed since I left the house that had once been my childhood home, and the emptiness I had feared was replaced by a quiet, steady hum of independence. My apartment, small and sunlit, was no longer just a place to sleep. It was a sanctuary. Every corner, every shelf, every piece of furniture reflected choices I had made for myself, not for anyone else. I realized that life without their constant demands was strange at first. No frantic calls, no urgent pleas for help, no invisible weight pressing on my shoulders. The quiet was disorienting, but also healing. I slept through the nights, woke up without tension knots in my shoulders, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without guilt. Work flourished in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant background noise of family emergencies, I could focus fully. I signed new contracts, expanded my freelance opportunities, and even began mentoring a small team of young women in my field. Their energy reminded me of the girl I had once been, determined, capable, and ready to claim her own place in the world. Occasionally, I thought of my family, of Jason, Mom, Dad, and even Emma. But those thoughts no longer carried the weight of obligation. I didn't feel the need to intervene, to rescue, to patch problems that weren't mine to fix. They were learning consequences in real time, experiencing life without the safety net I had quietly provided for decades. And while I felt a pang of guilt at first, I reminded myself gently that love and loyalty cannot exist where respect is absent. One afternoon, I ran into Aunt Marlene at the grocery store. She looked at me with the kind of curiosity that didn't know which side she should take. "Your mother hasn't stopped worrying about you," she said softly. I smiled faintly. "I won't be coming back," I replied. No explanation, no guilt, just a simple boundary. She nodded, accepting it, and we parted ways. The silence became normal. It wasn't lonely. It was a canvas on which I painted my own life. I allowed myself simple pleasures I had long postponed, an evening of reading, a weekend trip to a coastal town, coffee at sunrise. These weren't acts of rebellion. They were acts of reclaiming the time and energy I had always sacrificed. Then one evening, a message appeared on my phone from an unknown number. It was from someone who had once been close to Emma, sharing a note about how my story had inspired them. "You did the right thing walking away," it read. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I took a screenshot and filed it silently, a quiet reminder that my choices, though difficult, were right. It was in those moments of quiet reflection that I understood the full lesson of the past months. Love doesn't demand your disappearance. Loyalty doesn't require the erasure of your own life. Respect is not optional, it is essential. And boundaries, though often mistaken for cruelty, are a declaration of self-worth. I thought of the girl I had once been, the dependable daughter, the fixer, the quiet hero. She deserved better than the constant invisibility she had endured. And now, finally, I could be that woman fully and without compromise. Life continued with steady rhythm. Jason moved out of state, starting a new chapter far from the household I had once sustained. Mom and Dad found temporary arrangements, grappling with the consequences of years of reliance on me. Emma faded from the picture, her presence a reminder of how entitlement can distort perception and judgment. And me, I thrived quietly, rebuilding not just my physical space, but my sense of self. There were nights I still thought about the empty chair at the dinner table, the voicemail, the countless unacknowledged sacrifices. But instead of grief or anger, I felt clarity. I hadn't abandoned anyone. I had stepped away from a situation that no longer served respect or love. I had chosen survival, dignity, and peace over obligation and invisibility. I poured a glass of wine one evening and sat by the skylight, watching snowflakes drift against the city lights. I thought about all the years I had given to others at the cost of my own well-being, and I smiled, not out of bitterness but understanding. Those years had taught me what I was worth, what I deserved, and the unshakable importance of boundaries. Sometimes love isn't staying. Sometimes love is leaving before there's nothing left of you to save. I had walked away, yes, but in walking away, I had discovered a life that belonged entirely to me. Courage, I realized, wasn't in sacrifice. It was in choosing oneself without guilt. I raised my glass to the quiet apartment, to the life I had carved for myself, and to the girl I had once been. And in that moment, I felt whole. I was not cruel. I was not selfish. I was brave. I was free.